It seems like it was just yesterday that Christine Blasey Ford testified that she didn't know where, when, or how any of these things happened between her and Brett Kavanaugh, but she was sure it was him, but she couldn't really remember anything else, and neither could any of her friends, and therein lies the great problem. What you're seeing on your screen is the Time 100. This is the list of Time Magazine's chosen 100 most influential people in the world, of which they include Christine Blasey Ford. Now, just to recap, for those that aren't familiar, she's the one who accused now Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh of pushing her down into bed when she was a teenager and groping her before she escaped, him and his friend. Fortunately, she didn't know how she got to this party where it happened. She didn't know when the party happened. She didn't know how she got home. None of her friends remembered any of this happening. And so there was really just a faint memory from 30 years ago that resulted in national debate. It resulted in congressional hearings. And now because of this, you could say Christine Blasey Ford is one of the most influential people in the world. However, the way it's framed, as this is written by Kamala Harris, is rather interesting because what is she actually influential for doing? What did she influence? Well, in fact, Christine Blasey Ford was influential in, let me zoom in a little bit, hurting the MeToo movement, because now, following this, men are less likely to believe women when they claim that they were assaulted or harassed. Men are less likely to trust women following the Kavanaugh hearings. And I have covered the story, excuse me, in the past. But I believe, this opinion piece by Tiana Lowe, it's actually kind of a follow-up to something she did in October, where she said, "I warned you all in Politico magazine that the Kavanaugh hearings are hurting me too." And she did. So this was back, I believe, during just around the time of the hearings, yes. If the movement is going to change America, it needs to support conservatives like me. This partisan debate isn't helping. This Time 100 piece by Christine Blasey Ford was written by Kamala Harris. So, of course, it's very supportive of Christine Blasey Ford, her accusation against Brett Kavanaugh that had no evidence. One thing we often see in the press is they'll say, Trump asserts, comma, without evidence, comma, and they'll go on. Because the press is very concerned about whether or not someone can actually back up their claims, unless or until you get Christine Blasey Ford. Because she had no evidence and she barely remembered what actually happened, and she had no witnesses that could confirm anything she said. In fact, she just had contradictory statements, claiming that she was scared of flying, for one, but as challenged in the hearing, we learned that she flies on vacation and across the country all the time. So, in fact, not only was there no evidence, it was just contradiction after contradiction. So, ultimately what happens? She hurts the MeToo movement. The hearing backfires. So, yes, she's absolutely influential in hurting the left. But let's see what Kamala Harris had to say about her. Her story, spoken while holding back tears, shook Washington and the country. Her courage in the face of those who wished to silence her galvanized Americans. But according to polling data, it galvanized them in the other direction, against her. And her unfathomable sacrifice, out of a sense of civic duty, shined a spotlight on the way we treat survivors of sexual violence. Christine Blasey Ford's ambition wasn't to become a household name or make it onto the list. She had a good life and a successful career and risked everything to send a warning in a moment of grave consequence. At her core, she is a teacher, and through her courage, she forced the country to reckon with an issue that has too often been ignored and kept in the dark. Yes, it resulted in the other direction. Because this opinion piece talks about how Republican men felt more inclined to believe women before the hearing. And we'll read this piece in a second. But I do want to make sure I point out, Brett Kavanaugh himself is featured on the Time 100 list as one of the most influential people in the country. Well, he did become a Supreme Court justice, so that's certainly a sound argument. But let's see how they talk about Brett Kavanaugh. Will they contrast it with the MeToo movement? When Brett Kavanaugh, this is written by Mitch McConnell. When Brett Kavanaugh was named the president's choice to succeed Justice Anthony Kennedy, he was one of the most qualified Supreme Court nominees in modern history. He had a sterling academic record, impeccable legal credentials, and a prolific record of thoughtful and impartial jurisprudence over more than a decade on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. But when unhinged partisanship and special interests sought to distract the Senate from considering those qualifications, we saw other facets of Justice Kavanaugh's character shine forth as well. The country saw his resilience and commitment to public service. We saw his loyal devotion to family and friends. We saw his undeterred reverence for the law, for precedents, and for our nation's highest traditions. It is all of these qualities combined that make Justice Kavanaugh exactly the kind of jurist whom the American people deserve on our Supreme Court. I look forward to many years of brilliant, distinguished public service. One of the next story I'm doing, it's going to be at 4 p.m. on my main channel, youtube.com/timcast. Yes, it's a different channel. Is going to be about the idea of the new left and the new right. And there's a piece written in Quillette, which I'm going to go through a bunch of more facts later on. But it's very important to bring up now before moving into the data. Because one of the arguments made is that when someone like Dave Rubin hangs out with Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk, clearly it shows he's more in line with conservatives. But in fact, I would argue what we're actually seeing is the left. Whatever the media is propping up as the left is not really the left. It is a chaotic force that really just is aimless. And what we see now is, why would someone like Tim Pool, who's a socially liberal individual, I literally just tweeted about how I want government investment into certain programs, into education investment, I want reform, and I don't believe a free market can properly incentivize a healthcare system the way it has, which is what we'll get into later on. But the point is, why would Tim Pool, social liberal, why would Dave Rubin be talking to these people? Perhaps because we see the reality of Brett Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey Ford. Perhaps it's because as moderates who lean left, after this, we see a baseless accusation with no evidence and not even memory or any witnesses. And we're left to logically conclude that these people aligned with Christine Blasey Ford they are misleading us or outright lying. It's not an issue of whether or not I like Brett Kavanaugh. In fact, in most of my videos about him, I've talked about how I think he has regressive views on technology and the Fourth Amendment. I am not a fan of him. However, I think lying about who he is and his character is insane and wrong. And that brings me to the next story we have here. So so I've covered this. There was a Gallup poll that shows men are less likely to believe women now across the board, not just Republicans. But let's read. Prior to the Kavanaugh hearings, Perry Undum found that fewer than 1 in 5 Republican men were more inclined to believe a man accused of assault than the woman accusing him. Today, the figure has spiked to more than 1 in 3. The origins of the MeToo movement were vital and wholly justified. The watershed moment of Harvey Weinstein, accusers coming forward led to rape reports to the police nearly doubling. A necessary cultural conversation emerged, and it brought down hundreds of men from Roy Moore to Kevin Spacey, who faced credible, contemporaneously corroborated allegations of assault. But then the left decided to weaponize it against Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh doesn't share my preferred jurisprudence. I waited with bated breath in the hopes that President Trump would nominate a stalwart of civil liberties to replace Anthony Kennedy, only to be sorely disappointed that he selected someone so deferential to the executive. But there was no evidence that Kavanaugh lived his life with anything but the utmost integrity and honor. Still, he fell victim to the most malicious smear campaigns in modern politics. Here's the thing. Not a fan of the interpretations that Brett Kavanaugh has. But I think the ideas must be challenged, and I have no reason to believe that Brett Kavanaugh's a bad person. He's just literally someone with a different opinion. And therein lies the true problem. It's fascinating to me to see Time magazine putting Christine Blasey Ford in the 100 along with Brett Kavanaugh. Think about this disparity. Who is Brett Kavanaugh? Brett Kavanaugh was a long-standing D.C. Circuit Court judge. He was nominated to be a Supreme Court justice. He was confirmed. He is now on the highest court of our country, leading some of the most important decisions and setting some of the most important precedent. By all definitions, he is certainly one of the most influential people in the world. Now, who is Christine Blasey Ford? She is I believe she's a doctor. I don't want to take that away from her. Absolutely influential in her career and her academia, 100%. However, there are many doctors. There are many academics. As it stands, the reason she's being included in the Time 100 is simply because she had, without evidence, an accusation against a Supreme Court justice nominee. I'm not entirely sure that makes her one of the most influential people in the world. If all it takes to be influential is to levy an accusation without evidence, without witnesses, against a prominent individual, then certainly we're going to see more people trying to become prominent by falsely accusing powerful individuals. Brett Kavanaugh has a career. He's made important decisions which will shape law in this country for generations to come. That is profoundly impactful. It will result in the U.S. government engaging in certain practices or not engaging in certain practices in terms of foreign policy. Who can we spy on? Who can we drone strike? How does that pertain to American citizens? It is going to be so damn influential, it will have repercussions around the world. for decades, generations, maybe even hundreds of years. Christine Blasey Ford has slipped back into obscurity. She's no longer particularly relevant. Her relevance for the world was making a baseless accusation against Kavanaugh for which there was no evidence. Now we're seeing accusations against Joe Biden. And where are those former activists who supported Christine Blasey Ford? Well, they're actually defending Joe Biden, at least some of them. Joe Biden, on camera, being creepy, touching women inappropriately, having women complain. We can see the photos, we can see the videos. It is what it is. If the women are upset because of what Joe Biden did, then we have reason to believe, I should say we know for a fact Biden did this. So then we should respect what these women are saying. However, with Christine Blasey Ford, there's just nothing there. And I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to claim she's wrong. It's just, listen, if you're going to make an accusation, you need at least some evidence, something that we can go on. But if even people who were supposedly there don't know, then what are we really doing? And ultimately, why would Christine Blasey Ford be considered one of the most influential people in the world? I honestly don't know. It certainly had an impact, but I believe there's two things we can say that I'll end this video on. Brett Kavanaugh is, by all means, one of the most influential people in the world, as I've outlined time and time again. Now, Christine Blasey Ford is certainly not, in any professional respect, one of the most influential people in the world. However, based on what she did and the precedent she set by making an accusation against a Supreme Court justice without evidence and the hearings that resulted from it, she's absolutely influential. Influential in telling people that by levying an accusation against someone without evidence can make you influential. And thus, we may see for generations to come people lying to gain political power. So I'll leave it there. And I've got one more video coming up. The next video coming up, as I mentioned, we'll talk about what is the left? What is their goals? Is there really a new right? And I'll break this down. At least it's going to be a very opinionated video based on a Quillette article and Dave Rubin's pushback. So youtube.com/Timcast coming up at 4. I will see you then.